If you have played online video games in the past 10 years, you should be familiar with the concept of games as service and likely have a rather negative opinion of it. With the recent launch and immediate failure of Concord, a $200 million games as service game designed to carry the PlayStation brand in the competitive shooter space, the gaming community at large seems to agree that games as service conceptually has outstayed its welcome, and that it leads to the inevitable demise of entire game studios, and that any new attempt at games as service is a futile effort. Games as service is also associated with various monetization practices that gamers are often vocally against, such as astronomically expensive collab skin packs, starring Mariah Carey from Christmas, mythical legendary ultra giga rare weapon skins where the weapon was handcrafted by Satan himself using skeletons of the newborn, or just an excessive amount of cosmetics in general that destroys the art direction and aesthetics of the base game. While there are a lot of negative effects caused by the game industry diving headfirst into the trend of wanting to create the next forever game, it is ignorant to pretend like games as service is a complete recipe for disaster when in fact, it is a rather natural and logical evolution of online multiplayer gaming that benefits a majority of its player base and improves the longevity of the games themselves. Let's quickly define games as service and what it entails, as there are a couple of misconceptions and ambiguities with the term. Games as service is essentially a business model that focuses on long-term support for a video game by slowly rolling out incremental content consistently throughout a game's lifespan. Usually through seasonal updates, where the game receives one large content update every few months, with smaller events rolling out once every few weeks after. There appears to be a misconception that games as service is actually a genre of games, with games like Suicide Squad and Anthem being labeled as such. While those games certainly had games as service aspirations and utilized the business model, the genre of games they belong to is commonly referred to as looter shooters, which was popularized by the Borderlands series and then adopted by a variety of other games, such as Destiny, Warframe, The Division, and so on, where the main gameplay loop revolves around changing the name of your gun from blue to purple to green and then to gold. So next time you write an angry comment telling devs to stop incorporating games as service in games, make sure you are actually mad about the right thing, because you might just not like every PvE game being turned into a co-op looter shooter. With that out of the way, let's talk about the benefits of games as service and why I think it's the best business model to keep games alive. One of the most effective ways to understand the benefits of games as service is to look at specific game series pre-games as service and post-games as service, and analyze the way the shift in business model affected the amount of post-launch content, the quality of the content, and the state of the game at launch. For our first comparison, I've chosen Call of Duty, as I've been following the series closely ever since it cemented itself as the premier mainstream shooter, ever since the release of original Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare. And Call of Duty as a whole represents the ever-shifting trends of the gaming industry, as it shifts and warps its identity year after year to stay slightly behind the curve to prevent itself from losing relevance. Looking at the Call of Duty games post-COD 4 to Ghost, which we will label as the Golden Age due to the level of acclaim and popularity of the series during that period, and the gameplay of that period exemplifying what most considered to be classic boots-on-the-ground COD, we're seeing games that launch with an average of 14 to 16 maps for the core 66 maps, campaigns that average from 5 to 6 hours of gameplay, and a dedicated PvE mode such as Zombies and Extinction. Occasionally, you'll see games tackle alt modes as well, such as 2v2 with their dedicated maps. For now, let's focus on multiplayer maps, as maps are important pieces of content for the Call of Duty game series, as they define the core of the multiplayer gameplay experience. And in the Golden Age era Call of Duties, all DLC content consisted entirely of maps, outside of Black Ops 2 adding one DLC gun, and Ghosts adding 3 DLC guns within certain map packs. Each season, the game would release expansion packs throughout the year that adds basically nothing but new maps for 7-ish months, until that year's COD came to a close in terms of content support. The amount of DLC maps varied dramatically, with Black Ops 1 getting 12 DLC maps, MW2 getting 10, and MW3 getting 17, including maps for the 2v2 mode. Frankly, I absolutely hated this DLC system. $15 for 4 maps is absurd, and if you didn't want to buy into this map pack DLC business model, then you were basically playing the launch version of the game with zero meaningful changes for the rest of the game's lifespan, with minor fixes and updates here and there. Not to mention, the player base would be fractured by the matchmaking to accommodate for the DLC owners, as players that owned a certain map pack would be put into their pool of DLC owner matchmaking. This era of COD is always glorified by much of the player base, especially the older players that loved the franchise when they were younger. But holy shit, you play the game for 3 months, and it feels stale as shit unless you shell out $15 repeatedly for map packs. Now, I'm going to list all the features we are accustomed to in modern Call of Duty post MW 2019 that did not exist in the DLC map pack era. For the sake of arguing about consumer friendliness and being predatory, we are focusing on free content, so that's going to be the same amount of base maps on launch on average. In addition to the base core 6v6 maps, you have other modes like 2v2, ground war, etc. And a new season every 2 months, with each season including usually 3 new 6v6 maps and potentially more if we included alt modes, 3 to 4 new guns per season, a battle pass with various free cosmetics and rewards like double XP tokens, weekly unlockable attachments and weapon conversions, new kill streaks, new perks, meaningful balance changes 2 to 3 times a season, new map variants and event game modes, rewards for said event game modes, new permanent game modes, and oh yeah, a literal entire free-to-play version of the game that gets its own content updates. So, looking at this staggering difference in free content, which it would receive 0 of in this golden age era of COD, it makes 0 sense why people would want to cite that era of gaming as the pinnacle of fair monetization and the good old days of non-greed driven game design, when retail multiplayer shooter games back then would basically have 0 meaningful post-launch content outside of expensive as shit map packs. And if we look laterally at some of the free-to-play titles of that era that are the precursors to our modern games as service model, we have $2,000 skins locked behind gambling loot boxes, weapons being sold for an exorbitant amount of money in the in-game shop, and pay-to-win stat-changing guns being sold with expiration dates in Asian knockoff shooters like Crossfire, which was a top 5 earning game globally for ages, by the way. One of the weirdest aspects about games as service discourse is certainly the nostalgia for the past, when objectively there weren't that many PvP multiplayer games back then with exemplary customization and monetization options. This idea of we used to get all of these cosmetics as unlocks for free, modern games are so greedy, is parroted quite a bit, when most retail PvP multiplayer games back then didn't have a particularly robust cosmetic system with free unlocks at all. And we are exclusively talking about PvP games because obviously PvE games like Monster Hunter and other loot-based games is designed around earning visual upgrades through gameplay, and PvE games generally need more rewards and incentives to keep players engaged due to the lack of satisfaction of defeating real players. The golden era CODs have had absolutely 0 cosmetic customization outside of the same gun camo system in every Call of Duty game ever, outside of Black Ops 1 having shitty face paints. There's also these $2 bacon camos, which are arguably more offensive than most modern shop skins. Battlefield was sparse as well, with extremely basic camo style palette swaps on player models and guns, which made sense as Battlefield to some extent had to maintain its pseudo milsim aesthetic. Free-to-play games all the while have historically been extremely predatory already, with things like pay-to-win weapons in Asian-based free-to-play games, and FOMO ultra-rare cosmetics in loot boxes being rampant in games like TF2 and Dota, with games like League of Legends having technically no pay to win but unlocking characters behind grind or pay walls, where it is still objectively advantageous to pay for unlocks. Fighting games like Street Fighter have historically charged about $15 per model changing skin ever since Street Fighter 4, and they're still doing it to this day. The only example I can think of with a half-decent cosmetic unlock model, and the only game series that people were able to cite as being extremely good with free cosmetics unlocks back then, is the Halo series. Historically, the Halo series has rewarded players who completed challenges with high-quality armor unlocks and easy-to-access alternate palettes, all of which are far harder to access in modern iterations of the games, such as Infinite gating most cosmetic unlocks behind Battle Pass tiers or stored purchases. But again, outside of Halo, quality cosmetic customization was essentially non-existent in older entries of some of the most popular titles in PvP multiplayer gaming, and post-launch gameplay content was sparse and overtly expensive in basically all of these games. The term predatory also has never particularly sat well with me, as it's basically repurposed to be synonymous with expensive or unaffordable in most modern contexts. I think using the term predatory in gaming was probably popularized by the late Total Biscuit, as he was one of the first popular game reviewers to consistently critique games for their monetization models. In the context of his era of game reviews, the term predatory was to specifically point out when games have explicit pay-to-win elements, as that era of free-to-play games were rife with disgusting pay-to-win in-game purchases, as mentioned before, and Total Biscuit was someone that reviewed many free-to-play multiplayer games of that era. In a contemporary modern setting in the 2020s, predatory seems to be tossed around a lot whenever games try to sell exorbitantly expensive items, such as the $500 RE skin pack, or heirlooms in Apex costing around $200 and having an RNG loot component, or literally anything Valve puts into a loot box, except Valve gets a pass because you can flip that shit and make a profit, and people love sucking Gaben off. This is a very difficult topic to discuss because it's very difficult for people to have perspective. We as average consumers generally do not like items that are too expensive. Hell, most of us don't even like paying money at all. So much so that we don't even want to buy video games nowadays, as most PvP online games have to be entirely free to play or suffer a crippled and dwindling player base at launch. But we should also recognize that players like us don't keep free games funded. There's plenty of research showing that games make a majority of their money off of less than 10% of their player base. Players called whales that spend thousands if not more in the game. So when these games release stupidly expensive items, it's not necessarily a mockery and bait to get poor people to fork over their hard-earned rent money for a knife made of pixels. It's for milking people with excessive disposable income that turn playing these games into a lifestyle, where pouring money into the hobby is the only way they can feel any sense of joy and satisfaction. Does it suck that you can't afford some of these items? Sure, but neither can I. But guess what? I can't afford a diamond ring on each of my fingers either. Am I going to call the entire jewelry business predatory? Well, I guess it's up for debate. But no one in the world needs a video game skin. No one in the world needs a 50-carat diamond on their fingers. No one needs a $200 Supreme shirt made for $5 in a Chinese sweatshop. These are all useless luxury shit for vanity with no purpose. When do we look at an in-game cosmetic purchase and say, well, that's not for me and that's okay. I don't need my gun to be diamond encrusted and shoot out pink lasers and call me a good boy when I get a kill? It does make me wonder, what pushes a person to feel cheated and distraught that a video game cosmetic is too expensive? There's been a lot of arguments made about how skins and customization makes the game more fun, and it's a core part of the game to customize your characters cosmetically. Where did this mindset come from? As mentioned before, basically no popular PvP multiplayer games had substantial free cosmetic, if any cosmetic at all, during the PS3 to Xbox 360 era outside of Halo. I'd love to be shown some examples of PvP games with great free cosmetic unlocks back then, but as it stands, I genuinely can't think of any games like that that would have conditioned people to argue for PvP games to include entirely free cosmetics of premium quality. I guess there's also something like Soul Calibur and Tekken's character builder, but that's a goofy custom character builder and the results usually look like shitty cosplays compared to the base outfits. And they charge money for DLC costume expansions anyways. As it stands, it's very obvious that unlockable cosmetics' entire purpose to even exist is to be sold. Why would a game studio spend efforts on cosmetics if they were to be made free? Of course, up to a certain extent, they'll include limited amounts of free cosmetics to improve player retention, as Call of Duty's Camo Grind post Black Ops 2 has introduced a rather lengthy and tedious grind that people seem to love, where you do various challenges hundreds of times on each gun to unlock several variants of rare camos as a status symbol. But in the context of Call of Duty, these camos are largely a copy and paste texture job that is fairly low effort on the development team. Now, if we look at something like the stupid fucking dragon gun from Valorant, or the super gay anime akimbo gun that plays a Discord e-kitten animation, the cost of labor invested in creating these damn skins is gonna warrant a price tag. So now we are faced with the basic facts of capitalism. Should these skins exist for free as earnable cosmetics? As a consumer of said product, hell yeah, you want free shit. Fuck them for even asking you to spend money on stuff, especially in a video game where the item isn't even real. As for the creators of the item, what are they getting out of spending money on making this item only to give it away for free? Well, you the consumer will play their game more, of course. Your precious time is so valuable to these companies. Now, what do they get out of you playing their game more? There's only one logical answer to this. You can do it. It's so you might eventually spend money, or for you to contribute to keeping the game alive so other people spend money. But at the end of the day, it's so someone out there spends money. And what will they spend money on? The gay anime gun that you can't afford, so they can flex on your ass with how much disposable income they have. So yes, due to the basic functionality of capitalism, the cool thing exists for the sake of making money. Could the cool thing have been made cheaper? Maybe. But no matter how much they skirt around the profit margin, people will complain about affordability until affordability isn't a concern, ergo making it free. And this isn't even factoring opportunity costs. Why make cheap affordable skin that makes small profit when it's the same effort to make not affordable skin that makes insane profit? The players at the end of the day are too much of pussies to quit the game outright anyways. No matter how absurd of a price these games companies try to charge for skins, as long as the game is fun and devoid of pay-to-win implementations, the community will grovel at their feet and play the game day in and day out. Coping that the refusal to engage with the monetization is a powerful sign of resistance against the greed of the devs. While Asian salaryman number 30 just spent half of his paycheck gambling in the game for a pretty dress to put on his character. Speaking of players too pussy to leave, remember that shit where they boycotted Genshin for not having dark-skinned characters in the Middle Eastern inspired region in the game? But boycotting only meant not spending money because they were too addicted to the game to actually quit playing? And ultimately, the game is still too addictive for them to drop outright? And MiHoYo is arguably the most dominant mobile gaming publisher out right now, with several Giga Smash hits in their portfolio? It's as if a game's main merit is in its overall gameplay, and that extraneous shit like cosmetics and minor character design changes don't affect 90% of the player base. Gamers have always had the funniest boycotts because it's basically never worked. It was a valiant attempt when League players banned Artery every game as a message against Riot's skin pricing policy. But looking at the ban rate graph, China and Korea pretty much didn't give a shit, and unfortunately they are also the two most important regions to League's revenue, and hell, Asia as a whole is an incredibly valuable region for a game's profitability in general. And that's just the sad truth about gaming monetization. Asian regions will always eat up the worst of schlop, be it gambling or cripplingly expensive skins. Your buying power as a Westerner is nothing compared to the millions in Asia. So you may as well swallow the schlop alongside them, or grow a spine and fuck off out of the pigpen. The closest thing to gamers making a difference to improving monetization is making gacha rates visible in games and having gacha banned in a select few European countries. But holy shit, that is completely negligible in the grand scheme when gacha and gambling are still extremely rampant in gaming. I suppose the incessant complaining on social media did dial back gambling mechanics in quite a few major releases in the West. Call of Duty has completely removed any and all RNG mechanics in the monetization, and so did Overwatch 2 and Halo. When previous iterations of these games were filled to the brim with battle packs and supply drops and loot crates and all sorts of bullshit. I guess that's a good thing for the most part, but it's also obvious that free cosmetic content from these games has also dropped significantly as a result. As a free-to-play player in most of these games, loot boxes were given out for free, and despite low odds, you still hit a pretty nice jackpot once in a blue moon. With the advent of premium battle passes, gating most premium cosmetics, and removal of RNG mechanics, free players have completely lost the ability to unlock most of these meaningful cosmetics, outside of spending multiple seasons accumulating premium currency to maybe be able to afford one battle pass once every 4 seasons. And thus leads to my main argument towards favoring games as service. I'm largely a free-to-play gamer. I love that most games nowadays are free because I hate investing $70 into a game that I might dislike, and often it takes me more than 2 hours of gameplay to decide whether it's a game I'll play for the foreseeable future. So the refund feature rarely benefits me. I do not support games as service as a business model because I'm a whale that loves blowing all my cash for cosmetic content. I support games as service as a business model because people who spend money on the game subsidize the free content that enhances my experience as a free-to-play gamer. Every dollar someone else spends is a dollar I don't have to personally spend, and the money generally makes its way to providing the game with more content. Unless you play something like TF2 where the only new content you get are more loot boxes with community-made cosmetics. Yes, I'm still shitting on TF2's monetization. It's dog shit and Valve pockets every dime without ever improving the game. Regardless of whether or not you personally like buying cosmetics, its existence is directly responsible for paid post-launch DLC becoming obsolete. So why would you as a gamer be mad about skin prices? Do you think that without all these paid skins, you would give stuff like free character unlocks, free maps, and crazy shit like an entirely free BR game mode? If we judge these games entirely on their merits instead of feeling cynical about the fact that a lot of these features are designed for making money, the net positives that come with games as service as a model are still staggering compared to these games without games as service incorporation. Is it valid to critique the trend of too many devs pivoting to games as service when they have no business doing so and making complete flops like Concord, Anthem, XDefiant, etc.? For sure. But that's not the fault of games as service as a concept. For every failed hero shooter like Concord and Battleborn, there's also a Marvel Rivals and Paladins. For every failed co-op shooter like Anthem, there's a Helldivers 2. And for every failed arcade shooter derivative like XDefiant, there is a The Finals. To dismiss games as service in its entirety is to also dismiss the fact that we've gotten extremely high quality games, both free and paid, that receive consistent and substantial post-launch support and are able to satisfy and grow their player base for years. I agree that it's an atrocity to force single-player oriented studios to make a games as service co-op Ludo shooter like what happened to BioWare, Rocksteady, and Crystal Dynamics, but that's not the fault of games as service co-op shooters as a genre. There can be passion and talent in creating and sustaining a games as service game, and there can also be studios being taken hostage and forced into creating a subpar product. It makes no sense to dismiss the entire business model when it's clear that most failed games as service are the results of an overtly ambitious CEO forcing developers to make a game they have no experience or familiarity with. So, are games as service games super fucking bad and killing the game industry? In my opinion, games as service is what is keeping the game industry intact. Games as service games have become the core of the games industry, giving most gamers an insane amount of free-to-play options because their time has become so valuable that game companies are willing to give you a free product just to get you to try their product. When I was a kid, the only free game I got to play were fucking Roblox and various shitty Korean MMOs that rip off real games. Can you imagine being in the Xbox 360/PS3 era in middle or high school and being able to play Call of Duty, Apex, PUBG, Counter-Strike, Fortnite, Destiny, Halo, Overwatch, all for free on one console with crossplay? Bro, gaming is in an absolute insane state, and it's fucking incredible. We have it so fucking good, and you'd rather go on social media to complain about skins than play any one of these incredibly high budget and well produced free video games? Yes, games as service isn't absolutely perfect, but at the end of the day, no profit-driven product will feel perfect for the consumer. There is an argument to be made that a $60 game that is feature-rich and content-full is much better than a free game that requires months if not years of post-launch support to feel complete. But how many games were like that in the good old days? Do you remember how many of those beloved games ended up being asset flips that got a slightly new version the next year and charge you $60 again? I personally also don't buy the argument that games as service games are all incomplete products that needs post-launch support to become complete, because first of all, you have invested $0 into these free-to-play products, so your expectations and what you feel entitled to content-wise is 100% irrelevant. If the game has the content that attracts you to play it, then download that shit for free and enjoy the game. If the lack of content is concerning to you, then just don't play it and play it in the future for free when they release more shit. Instead, gaming culture has created droves of mouth breathers who'd rather play these games day in and day out but complain about content that was promised to them when they've committed absolutely nothing to the game to begin with. I don't think I'm a corporate bootlicker, even though this entire video can maybe come off this way. I rarely buy games at full price. I almost never buy cosmetics. I've sworn off Asian gacha games entirely. And I've paid for maybe 2 to 3 battle passes in my years of online gaming, despite having thousands of hours combined in Apex, Overwatch 2, and various Call of Duties. I'm extremely frugal with spending money on gaming as a hobby, and that is simply due to the trend of games as service completely eliminating the need for me to spend money. That is, unless my brain short circuits and turns me into a vanity-ridden bourgeoisie gamer that just can't help myself but spend hundreds on looking pretty. Am I wrong to feel defensive about a business model that has offered me many quality free products and created a culture where free and quality content is to be expected and is the norm? Am I supposed to be up in arms about eliminating cosmetics in Call of Duty and demand a return to the golden era of COD where you get no meaningful update unless you pay $40 to $60 on stupid ass maps after buying a whole ass game that becomes obsolete a year later? Am I supposed to want games to stop being free to play and go back to retail so it can be like the good old days where you buy a game for full price like Brink, Lawbreakers, and Battleborn and play with a concurrent 700 players for 2 months than have a dead game with 0 online lobbies? I guess to give Concourse some credit, they did refund everyone their money back. Ultimately, it is in your consumers' rights to call out companies for being shit, and most companies are very shit, but we should also have some perspective on the history of gaming, and to understand that gaming is at its most accessible state ever, and we are enjoying a hobby that offers more free content than we can even experience. But nothing is truly free, and it comes at a cost, and currently that cost is games being flooded with optional paid cosmetics, which is a deal with the devil I'm willing to take. If I can be a free player and kick the shit out of the guy that spent hundreds looking pretty at no disadvantage, that's all I ask for. However, I like to advocate for Riot headquarters to be nuked, because holy shit, I used $20 worth of free RP to roll on this and got a chroma I can't use and 3-player icons. Burn it all down, fuck video games.
4,000 RP. That's like 40 bucks, I think. So that was 30 bucks?